I lifted the page in front of my eyes and read it. In it, I lifted the page in front of my eyes and read it. In it, I lifted the page in front of my eyes and read it. In it, I lifted the page in front of my eyes.
You hear that outside? It's the month where the ghosts and ghoulies come out to sing us a sad song about the man behind the slaughter.
Are you challenging me?
Now, being a purveyor of fine video games that I am, I'd be happy to indulge in some Halloween fun, except for a few problems. First, scary games aren't exactly my specialty, despite what that one video might try to tell you.
No! You better get the fuck back, I will. Michaela! That wasn't funny!
And second, what the hell would I even play? I mean, most horror games are just jump scare haunted houses. They're not really that spooky, just surprising for a split second. To quote Max Payne, they're just
the linear sequence of scares. Take it or leave it is the only choice given.
Not to mention, Halloween kind of typecasts you for genres. There's horror, obviously, but isn't there anything else that captures the spirit of the season? Horror in the world of gaming has always been stuck in the need to be scary rather than using it as an aesthetic. They feel these incessant needs to justify their campy elements through the lens of mechanics or lore or publisher mandates. We'd all be stuck playing Silent Hill and Resident Evil every Halloween if it wasn't for some ingenuity on the part of older designers. You know who I would have loved to see make a horror game? Remedy, the guys who did Max Payne. But they never made that game. Instead, they made something else. Something that you never would have guessed was a 7th gen console release. That's because there's just something about Alan Wake. First, let's get something out of the way. Alan Wake isn't really a horror game. It's not scary. Yeah, whatever, Anderson. Fucking... Fuck. What a prick.
Or he doesn't really... He's not remembering well because the town is making him stupid.
If you look at the marketing or the way Sam Lake talked about the game, or hell, just you look at the goddamn box, it says a psychological thriller. It's not a horror game.
Alan Wake is a psychological action thriller. It's a story-driven experience. We want to guarantee the players the best possible rollercoaster ride through the game, and a thriller story is our way of doing it. To us, a thriller means strong atmosphere and mood, and a smart story to give a reason for all the scares.
But Archibald, I hear you typing with your grease-stained fingers. This game is trying to be spooky. There's shadow men chasing you. You're right, but that's only because the game is devolving into a horror game, or rather a horror story. Alan Wake continues the Remedy tradition of being a shockingly effective deconstruction of both game design as well as narrative design through the use of heavy-handed meta-narratives tied directly to the gameplay. Remedy made a name for themselves with Max Payne, a brilliant homage to a mix of John Woo-style action and noir detective stories from the 30s, wrapped up into a video game equivalent of an 80s action film. There's lots of things that make Max Payne special, something to keep in mind for the winter, by the way, but what jumps out to many people is its shockingly healthy relationship with the player.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for you tonight. I want to thank all our guests for the evening. Alan Wake, Sam Lake. Once more, do the face for us, Sam. There it is. And
most games nowadays don't have any relationship with the player to begin with, and if they do, they're almost always negative. You could imagine most people stuck in the rut of competitive gaming like MOBAs or essentially battered housewives, but they just keep coming back because Riot really does love them at their heart.
Stop! 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 God damn it!
If you play modern AAA titles and your relationship is akin to maybe a household pet, like you go and eat your slop like the caretakers want you to, but then, well, they just kind of lock you up for the rest of the day so you don't piss on the carpet. Remedy, though, was one of the earlier examples of instituting meta elements into their games, though not in any way that you might call serious. This isn't Undertale or Off. Max Payne is the star of the show. His existence sort of spirals out of control while the player takes the reins and goes on a killing spree. But when its more surreal elements are baked into the meta jokes in the background, it makes the whole thing flow better in your mind. It lets the games get away with stuff like the shows on TV just being a parody of the events in the game itself.
Mira's men pretended to be hospital wardens.
The flesh. The flesh. I think I died. I think I'm dead. I don't know. I don't know.
It makes the moody noir comic panel things into a totally sensible inclusion, even though on the surface you'd think they'd clash with the rest of the game. Surely just normal cutscenes would have sufficed. Remedy didn't make games like that though. They prefer to have style and substance, because it turns out you can just do both of that and it works just fine. And it's from that particular lens that you need to view Alan Wake, because without it, the game honestly doesn't really work all that well. Its gameplay isn't nearly as balls-to-the-wall fun and engaging like Max Payne, but that's sort of the point. Alan Wake the character is not some quippy wise guy detective addicted to painkillers, but that's the point. The game isn't scary, like a horror game is supposed to be, but that's the point. If Max Payne was an homage to all those things I listed before, then Alan Wake is an homage to the writings of horror and thriller authors, the most obvious being Stephen King.
As a teenager, just starting to get interested in writing, Stephen King had been a source of inspiration to me.
Not just that, it also conjures similar elements from Lovecraft and the works he inspired, with the plot of John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness being a pretty obvious example.
This is not reality, not reality, not reality. This is reality.
It's pretty important to stress just how that changes the game, because remember, this isn't just a game being an homage, it's a Remedy game being an homage, which means it leans fully into being an aesthetic recreation of that thing. Max Payne had Max narrate the story because noir detectives do that. Alan Wake has him narrate his game because he's literally the narrator of a story he wrote.
Who wrote this crap anyway?
Just like Max, we glimpse Alan's mind through his inner monologue, just instead of it being an actual monologue, it's an actual narration, directed both at the player as well as whoever might read the pages of Alan's manuscript. Which brings us back to the horror bit. Alan Wake is not a horror game. Like I said, take a look at that cover art. It says psychological action thriller, not horror. Not once did any of the advertising, interviews, or other media ever refer to the game as having anything to do with horror, because it's not supposed to. The story of Alan Wake is a story about trying to stop reality from becoming a horror story, not actually being in one. Imagine it like if Silent Hill wasn't about you trying to survive Silent Hill, but instead trying to stop the cult from creating the conditions which would create the horrors of... Oh, fuck me. Never mind. Pretend I didn't say that. The point is, you can't exactly treat this game like a horror title, because it's not trying to be one. It's more complicated than that. That's why you'll notice that the game uses things that simply aren't scary. For example, your foes throughout the game are a combination of crazy, darkness-possessed townsfolk and inanimate objects manipulated by the evil presence, and that's basically it. There's no actual monsters, no real variety, unfortunately, but that's partly because the story is more grounded because it's a novel, not a game. That's probably a turnoff for a lot of people, but then again, this is a Remedy game, so you should have expected something a little more subtle. Alan Wake is that mentality taken to a different genre, and because it's so focused on being this strange combination of novel and game, it manages to create a narrative that's really interesting, something that only Remedy could have come up with. The game follows the titular Alan Wake as he and his wife travel to the town of Bright Falls, where they hope they can resolve Alan's horrifyingly bad writer's block. Unbeknownst to them, however, is the town holds a dark secret that the nearby lake contains this sinister presence capable of bringing works of art to life at a twisted distortion of the author's intent. The presence kidnaps his wife by luring them to the lake and then uses its power to trick Alan into writing a story, not about a fictional world, but the real one. A story which grants the presence more power to act out its dark plan, eventually to free itself from the confines of the lake. It's a really interesting idea, and further helped again by the insistence that the game be a novel first, and then using that framing to make the game more engaging. Collectibles in Alan Wake take the form of either coffee thermoses, which are just normal collectibles, as well as manuscript pages. These pages are the actual writings of Alan, describing events in the story of the game, but with a twist. These events are shown to you in all sorts of ways. For example, some give insight to events you aren't privy to in gameplay. Some give context into the thoughts of characters or reveal things that might have seemed out of place normally. They foreshadow certain events or outright spoil them to you, as well as jumping backwards in time to explain pertinent questions which just might be relevant around the corner. The best ones are the pages where they just describe actions that characters are taking in the moment. Like that one at the beginning describing Alan reading the page where he reads the page where he reads the page. While others, like the ones focused on FBI agent Nightingale, show how characters themselves are reacting to finding out that they're essentially in a novel already. And this all came out on the 7th generation of consoles. You know 7th gen, the one dominated by Call of Duty gamer bros, declining game quality, the walking abortion that was motion controls.
I keep going, there's a movie theater on your right. Fuck! Are you I honestly didn't mean to do that!
The generation that decided that making subtle games was for nerds, or the idea of making your game accessible to all types of players ended up ruining basically everything that wasn't a shooter? Yeah, that generation. Frankly, the only reason the game probably has any shooting in it to begin with is because it was 7th gen. This game shares a lot in common with Deadly Premonition in the development department. The latter had combat because it was forced to have it, but still managed to include its massive open world and eccentric characters, making it this really engaging David Lynch homage. Alan Wake was going to be similar. It would have also had an open world with Wake traveling to different locales in gameplay rather than just cutting to them in levels. Sadly, that didn't happen. Instead, it plays much more traditionally, with the combat segments at night spaced out with much calmer, character and dialogue-focused segments in the daytime. That is, of course, because the monsters only come out at night, another Deadly Premonition similarity. The foes of Alan Wake are suffused with a dark essence from the presence, and only light can make them vulnerable. This is where the combat really gets some actual footing. Enemies are dangerous because for a significant portion of time when you're interacting with them, they're completely invulnerable. To defeat them, you have to scour the darkness away with some source of light. Usually it's your flashlight, but other options pop up as the game goes on. Flares can be used to create space and drive foes back, as well as having this incredible look to them when they're used. The lighting in the game itself isn't actually that impressive. Instead, it's the heavy use of post-processing tweaks which make them jump out more visually. They're extremely bright, with flares oozing this dull red, battling against the swirling darkness of the forests and mountains. Flashbangs become your grenades, not used to blind people, but to rather destroy them outright. And the flare gun, usually just a handy tool in the forest and mountains, becomes your most powerful weapon, with limited ammunition. This is all important to note because Alan himself isn't much of a fighter. He'd be the kind of guy to unironically say the pen is mightier than the sword, even when he's getting chased by monsters. He's a nerd. Alan tires quickly, and he can only carry a pistol and one long arm, though he can stuff his pockets full of flares, I guess. He's a scrappy fighter, not like Max Payne who blasts gangsters like it's going out of style. He's very clearly struggling. Max struggles mentally, which bleeds into the game, but Alan struggles physically, barely dodging blows and hurriedly loading his weapons to try and get a shot off. There are no weapons in the game that you'd actually want to bring to a fight. They all reload really slow, one round at a time, making fights even more tense as the enemy gets closer. Thankfully, there is no difficulty subjected to the player when they actually try to aim. Since the game uses the direction of your flashlight as your reticle, as long as you're pointing at an enemy, your shot will most likely connect. Missing is actually kind of hard to do. Still though, it's a tense game, and your limited options for fighting opponents means you're often running away from them, or at times, trying to outright circumvent them, which is hard because, again, Alan isn't much of a runner. So instead, he needs to rely on dodging attacks moments before they make contact to avoid getting mobbed by foes, since getting hit doesn't grant any form of invincibility. Compared to older survival horror gameplay, it's certainly more engaging, though still limited. In a lot of ways, it's a precursor to the modern third-person action horror game, where mobility is the favored form of defending yourself, with foes who are much more mobile themselves when compared to their Resident Evil or Silent Hill predecessors. Still though, the gameplay would definitely struggle if that was all there is. But thankfully, this is Remedy, and they recognize the importance of pacing and intersplicing a mix of levity and calmer moments to balance out the sometimes underwhelming action. One of the ways they did this was with the old Max Payne classic of placing TVs for you to watch. In Max Payne, they were silly metaphors or allusions to the events of the game with a cheesy twist, almost mocking Max as he traverses each level. In Alan Wake, they're very similar. They serve to slow the player down not with sly references to the games, but instead with another homage to psychological thrillers, airing episodes of a show called Night Springs, an inverted version of the name of the town in which the game takes place.
We take the facts of our existence for granted, unaware that they are merely a thin veneer of desperate self-delusion, covering a vast cosmos of madness and horror. All too often, the stars are right. In Night Springs.
The show is a parody of The Twilight Zone, and it's actually a show that Alan wrote a few episodes for, something that he's not actually proud of, unfortunately. However, other TVs might show something different. Glimpses of Alan's state of mind as he wrote the manuscript, where we get to hear his slow spiral into madness, before managing to pull himself out at the last moment. They're all live action too, but unlike the original Max Payne titles, aren't just still frames. A fun little jump in quality courtesy of the newer hardware. But what does this all actually mean? So what if the game is another big homage? Is it really that noteworthy? Of course it is, because the game was doing this all for a reason. Alan Wake was trying to be that ultimate homage to these sorts of novels by doing away with everything you typically expect from a game. The story is told through this odd mixture of diegetic revelations where the player's involvement is essentially incidental. It's a game, obviously, but the story itself is a story within a story, which itself is the story of the game written by that wonderful man, Sam Lake. It's a game that begs to be thought about, the same way an actual novel wants you to think about it. It slows down to let you listen to the radio, for crying out loud, before lobbing you back into the game proper.
Walt? Well, I ain't the way you are, but, well, I can't sleep either, you know?
It's got those little things that make the game feel like a story. Vignettes cleverly disguised as sandboxes. I love this moment in the middle of the woods in the basement of this house. You enter it and you'll see writing on the wall with your light, and then being that you're likely a Westerner who reads left to right, your instinct is to pass the light to the right further along the wall, where it reveals more and more writing that rapidly devolves into maddened scribbles. I love the moment when Nightingale recognizes he's acting something out in the manuscript that he already read, and actually stops for a moment in some sudden act of clarity. I love how nearly every level orients the player towards a far-off light in the distance. You'll always know the right direction to go if you just follow the light, the one thing that's keeping you alive in this nightmare. I love the fight at the Old Gods of Asgard stage, and I love that the song that plays is actually really good. I love that the series that Alan is known for is itself just a parody of Max Payne, complete with art style and dramatic monologues. And I love the big reveal that I wish I didn't spoil here, but damn it, it's just so important to the story and themes of the game. But most importantly, I love that it takes itself seriously, something actual horror novels or games just can't do. There isn't actually that much left up to interpretation in Alan Wake. There are questions by the end, yes, but it's clear that the threat is real, that the events matter, that the characters matter, and that modern horror just they just don't do those things. There's always some spooky monster that just wants to get you, or more accurately, jump scare you. The concept of the story is that there's a bad fella who's being a naughty boy, summoning demons for no reason, or there's a ghost in that children's toy. Oh no! Alan Wake isn't a horror game, but I and everyone else compare them because it has the same effect on us. It makes us think about them long after we've played. It has the stylings of horror with a wholly unique aesthetic, something that hasn't really been tried again since. The new Alan Wake is finally coming out. I'm not playing it because it's on Epic Game Store, which... Okay, listen, Sam, I know Alan isn't that well known, but if you wanted to garner interest in the series again, the last thing you'd do is put it on a site that everyone actively tries to forget exists. You're just not going to win any battles with that one. Interestingly enough, though, Alan Wake 2 is a horror game, the marketing reminding us that this is Remedy's first foray into the genre, because the first game was totally different. In a time when horror was finally dying out due, once more, to the 7th generation's fall from grace, with the release of stuff like Resident Evil 6 or Silent Hill Downpour, Remedy made something that managed to capture what those old masters always strived for, the aesthetic of horror, combined with the air of calm comfort, hiding terror beneath it, like the presence under the lake. It was the anti-horror game, a psychological thriller. Hold the thrills. There will probably never be anything like it again, because there's something about Alan Wake. What a sorry state we're in.
Scary, scary, scary.
That's Emerson. We're actually making some progress with him, I'm happy to say. He works on video
Elbow
games.
strike. Ooh,
It's
yeah.
trash, of course.